Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for week 19. I'm sorry, week 16, not week 19. I'm here with you for HIT 421, which is legal aspects and release of information and HIPAA and all good things like that. We are on week 16. This is the first lecture video for this week. We're covering chapters 19 and 20. If you look at your syllabus, you'll see that we are covering unit objectives 9.9.1 through 9.9.13. As I said, there'll be two lecture videos this week, chapter 19 and chapter 20. This is chapter 19. If you want to follow along, you are welcome to open your book. I am on page 475. We're talking about medical staff. Why do you need to know about medical staff? Why is it important? Well, you will be working with medical staff wherever you are. Providers are credentialed and privileged, and that is an aspect of law that you need to know, whether you are working in a provider office, an outpatient setting, a clinic, a hospital, what have you. And of course, we do it because you need to know it for your eventual certification exam. So the governing board or the board of directors has ultimate responsibility for the quality of care and the financial well-being of the healthcare organization. They are the controlling authority for the healthcare organization. They are also responsible for providing adequate staff. So some of their responsibilities include defining the mission and purpose of the organization, selecting and hiring the CEO, reviewing and supporting the CEO, ensuring adequate organization planning, ensuring the financial health of the organization, that's called fiduciary duty, ensuring the quality of patient care, enhancing the public image of the organization, serving as a court of appeals for due process when it comes to the medical staff, and they have to assess their own performance. And they have to go through continuing education and all sorts of other things. They have to declare any conflicts of interest. There's a lot that they do. They do strategic planning. That's part of that organization planning. They are constantly given updates about what is happening in the organization when you're talking about quality, compliance, risk, market share, financial performance, all those types of things. And they are the ones who ultimately approve and permit the credentialing and privileging of the medical staff. The CEO reports directly to the governing board and works with the medical staff. I mean, if they're good, if they're a good CEO, they will work with the medical staff to provide patient care. They will not have a competitive attitude. They will not have a dismissive attitude. They will genuinely try and build positive, collegial, friendly, working relationships with the medical staff to try and make sure that the medical staff's needs are met, the hospital's needs are met, and patient care needs are met for the good of the community. The CEO is responsible for overall management of the healthcare facility. The medical staff is responsible for oversight of the quality of patient care, but even beyond them is the board. And between the medical staff and the board, sort of in a triangular relationship, is senior leadership. So you have the CEO and senior leadership team, you have the medical staff, and together they're working with the board to make the best quality of patient care occur. The medical staff are directly accountable to the governing board. Even though they work with the CEO and senior leadership team, they are accountable to the governing board. The limits of what the CEO and the senior leadership team can do are there if the medical staff decides to push it and go directly to the governing board. But remember, the governing board is supposed to be supporting the CEO. So you can see where it gets kind of interesting in the real world. The medical staff are governed by their bylaws, medical staff bylaws. They also have rules and regulations, but the bylaws are really the document that lay out exactly the relationship and expectations of medical staff members and the board and the hospital and performance and what happens when they disagree. What is the due process? How do they get onto the medical staff? What do they need to do if they want to leave the medical staff? It's there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. The medical staff bylaws have to be voted on by the medical staff and approved by the governing board. It is not easy to change a medical staff bylaw. Been there, done that. These are, once the bylaws are put into place, unless there's something significant that comes through to change it, maybe through legislation or maybe through something significant with the organization happening, maybe there's a merger or an acquisition, those types of things, they have to be voted on. And then once the medical staff votes to approve them, the bylaws then go to the governing board, and the governing board has to review them and approve them. Typically, I would say almost every organization I've been in, I've never been in a healthcare organization where the chief of staff or the president of the medical staff does not sit on the board and attend board meetings. Now, they're not a board member, but they attend the board meetings, they represent the medical staff, they are that voice. And most governing boards of healthcare organizations contain 2 or 3 physicians in addition to, as board members, in addition to the president that comes and sits there. The bylaws, as I said, outline medical staff obligations. They are considered a contract and legally binding in most states. The requirements for a medical staff are found in hospital licensure regulations, which vary from state to state, so you need to know your state. They are laid out in Medicare's, not medical, but Medicare's conditions of participation. And then if you are accredited by Joint Commission, there are some standards that are specific to that as well. The Joint Commission requires medical staff bylaws address self-governance and accountability to the governing body or the governing board. The medical staff have to operate under the direction of medical staff officers and committee structures. So you have a president of the medical staff, you typically have a vice chair or vice chief or vice president. There's usually a secretary and a treasurer. Those are the most common officer ones. And then you have departments, and those departments all have department chairs that are elected by that department. So for instance, there's usually an OBGYN committee, there's usually a surgical committee, there's usually a ED committee to represent the emergency room, physicians and providers, all those types of things. There are organizations that have additional officers or additional departments. I mean, you could have up to, I've been in organizations that have had like 20 different medical staff departments that meet, and it gets crazy. When you're talking about all those meetings, all those minutes, all those follow-ups, all those summaries that have to be pulled together to go to the board. Most boards meet every other month. Most hospital boards meet every other month. Some meet every month. Very few still meet on a quarterly basis because usually there's too much business to be done that they can meet under a quarterly basis. So it's usually every other month or every month, depending on the organization. But medical staff, that varies. Sometimes they are quarterly meetings, sometimes they're every other month meetings, and some departments choose to meet every month. The medical staff executive committee typically meets every single month. You may have a credentials committee, and that meets every month as well. And so it just varies depending on the organization, how they have it set up, and what are the needs of the medical staff. Some departments choose to meet every 3 to 6 months to do their business. Others need to meet every month. They have so much going on and information that needs to be reviewed because they're looking at protocols, they're looking at policies, they're talking about new equipment and processes, they're looking at legislation that's coming down the pike that could impact the medical staff. So it really varies. But usually most places try and get their departments to meet at least on a quarterly basis, if not every 4 to 6 months. So, medical staff committees, there's an executive committee that I was just talking about that has typically all of the officers as well as all of the department chairs. In addition, it has a handful of senior leaders like the CEO, may have the hospital attorney, typically does, quality management, risk management to attend these meetings. Even though hospitals who don't use Joint Commission for deemed status, this has gotten so common that everybody has an executive committee. So even though Joint Commission is the one that requires it for deemed status, most everywhere does have it anyway. So I talked about some of these that are typical medical staff committees. Most, I would say everyone has a credentials, everyone has a bylaws, everyone has a quality improvement, everyone has an infection control, and everyone has a P&T or pharmacy and therapeutics committee. Those are the most common ones that I would say I've never been an organization that doesn't have those. The others, a lot of that gets done either by the officers or through department chairs or through ad hoc committees that are pulled together at different times. There are different categories of medical staff. Not everybody is an active member. There are such things as associate members, courtesy members, consulting members, honorary members, affiliate members. There's emeritus members or retired members. There are all these different categories, but these are probably the most common. Credentialing, when you're talking about credentialing, it's the process of reviewing and validating qualifications of physicians and other licensed practitioners, such as PAs, nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives, CRNAs that do anesthesia, all of those that are granted membership on the medical staff. So they may not be a physician, but because of what they do and they are a licensed practitioner, they are part of the medical staff. And that varies. Some places limit medical staff membership to physicians in terms of voting and certain other rights. Others have the same membership regardless of whether you're a physician or a non-physician. Credentialing protects the public from professional incompetence. It protects the medical staff from working with incompetent professionals. It protects the facility from liability, that should say from, not form, from liability due to providing inadequate care, and it protects the right of medical staff from unfair restrictions on their practice. So credentialing is a very good thing. It is a lot of hoops to jump through. You have to have primary documentation. You have to go out to the National Practitioner Data Bank. You have to verify their license. You have to verify their malpractice insurance. You have to see case logs. You have to get references from other physicians about their performance that they've worked directly with. There's a lot that goes into this. And that's where we talk about a rigorous application process with primary source verification. You have to get primary source documents. And a lot of times you'll use a credentials verification organization because it takes a lot of time to gather the information. And the physician or the provider that's joining the medical staff, they can't always provide this. This is stuff that you as a medical staff department would have to go out and obtain. And so they give us a case here, Cadillac Medical Center versus Lakeview Anesthesia Associates. This was Louisiana federal court. And they found that hospitals have a duty to disclose information about current and former medical staff members to other healthcare providers to protect future patients when a physician moves on. And you'll learn more about this. This is not the first time that you'll talk and learn about the medical staff and the credentialing process. But this is just to let you know from a legal standpoint that there has been case law that requires information be shared about provider performance um, and legal settlements and things like that. So that when you have someone joining the medical staff, you know ahead of time what their past history is. If they've ever been sanctioned by their state board, those types of things. And I talked about the National Practitioner Data Bank. You have to query them, and that's any adverse actions taken against a practitioner at a time of initial application and every 2 years afterwards. That's why credentialing and then re-credentialing happens every 2 years. And then you have to, it says you should check, but it's mandated that you check the Office of the Inspector General's list of individuals and organizations excluded from participating in Medicare, Medicaid, or other federal program. It's not should. That should be marked out. Should is not here. It is you must. Because in fact, any organization that is decent about corporate compliance is checking that on an every 6-month basis. Every single staff member, every single provider is getting checked to make sure nothing has happened or occurred, because there are civil penalties that can be assessed if an excluded practitioner is hired. So, credentialing is different than privileging. Make sure that you understand that. Credentialing is not privileging, and privileging is not credentialing. Credentialing happens when someone joins the medical staff and every 2 years later. Privileging is what happens when you say, okay, you've been credentialed. Now let's talk about what you can do. Privileging is what you can do. Credentialing means you're joining the medical staff. Privileging means we're going to define what you can and can't do. There are some expected competencies, and you have to evaluate it both initially, and that's the FPPE, or Focused Professional Practice Evaluation, and then you have to do it on an ongoing basis, the OPPE, Ongoing Professional Practice Evaluation. So you have those. So typically focused is when someone joins the organization and they're credentialed for the first time. And there's usually a period. It can be 6 months, it can be 12 months, or it can be 18 months. It's whatever your organization determines. And then OPPE happens once they are on that 2-year cycle, or once they're off FPPE, they go on to OPPE. So let's say your organization says, we're going to do FPPE for the first 6 months that they're with us, or 12 months, whichever you decide. After that, they go on to the OPPE process, where you're watching them just as you would for somebody who's been there 6, 8, 10 years. Medical staff have duties and rights. They have the duty to provide patient care, treatment, and service as needed to patients. They have to respond to calls from the emergency department and provide consultation services when appropriate. Depending on their status, whether they're active, associate, courtesy, consulting, honorary, that defines what their duties are. That's why they have those different roles. They may be required, if they're on the active medical staff, they absolutely have to take ED call. They absolutely have to attend medical staff committee meetings and all those types of things. When you get into some of the other roles outside of active, then some of those get defined a little bit further. And they may not be responsible for call, or they may not have to attend medical staff committee meetings and things like that. Teaching facilities, they may have requirements where they have to supervise fellows, residents, and interns. There's always something in the bylaws, as well as the rules and regulations, about health record integrity and documentation requirements. Thank goodness. Most of that is in the rules and regs, but there are basic things that are required for accreditation and licensure that are in the bylaws. For instance, timely completion of medical records, legibility requirements, communication with other providers, coordination of care with other providers and staff, completion of reports like the history and physical report, progress notes, operative report, discharge summary, and then what happens if they fail to comply? What are the consequences of that, the results? What's the pathway if they disagree and they want to appeal? So that's where you get into the procedures that have to be in place to deal with disciplinary actions, suspensions. For instance, most hospitals have in place that if a provider does not get their records done, that you can revoke or suspend. I would say not revoke. You can suspend their admitting privileges or keep, and when that happens, they can't perform surgeries or things like that. And so you have to have procedures in place that lay all that out and have to be followed every single time. If you revoke privileges, you have to report that to the National Practitioner Data Bank. If you suspend their privileges because of record completion, it's only after the third time, the third occurrence, that it has to be reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. Due process is required. Due process basically means that you have fair rules and there's a procedure that if you disagree with a rule or you disagree with the situation or how it's being handled, that you have an opportunity to dispute that. And how will that happen? Who is involved? And those types of things. It places restrictions on how far things can go before they involve the legal system and those types of things. It's very, very important. There are important antitrust laws that have to be taken into consideration. For instance, you can't economically credential, meaning granting or denying privileges based on financial indicators rather than clinical performance. And so, for instance, if you have two physicians that are applying to join the medical staff, and one is a vascular surgeon and the other one is, let's say, a general surgeon, you can't grant the vascular surgeon privileges because you know they're going to bring in more money than the general surgeon and you've already got 5 other general surgeons. You can't do that. That would be economic credentialing. If you've got a physician who wants to join the medical staff, you look at their clinical performance and see, do they meet your requirements, and you bring them on. You can't say, well, we've already got 5 other general surgeons. We don't need a 6th one, but we really need this vascular surgeon. And this vascular surgeon has the ability to bring into a couple $1 million over a year because, they'll be doing, different advanced procedures that we weren't able to do before. So we get additional patients. We're no longer shipping patients out to a more complex facility that can do those because we'll have this vascular surgeon. So you can't do that. And those are things that have to be considered when you're doing credentialing. And usually you have a clause like that that's in the bylaws. And again, you can't set it up so that physicians can't compete. So for instance, if you have a physician who is on your medical staff and they decide that they want to work for a competing hospital across town, you can't dismiss them. You can't kick them off staff. You can't tell them that because they're on your staff, they can't be on another hospital staff. You can't do any of those kinds of things. So the case law that you should know are the Darling versus Charleston Community Memorial Hospital, which I believe we've already done this semester, and then the Cadillac Medical Center versus Lakeview Anesthesia Associates, which basically means that you have to thoroughly investigate and vet providers. You have to make sure you know if they've been sanctioned, where they've been sanctioned, how they've been sanctioned, all those types of things so that you're providing safe care. So that is it for Chapter 19. I will be back soon to talk to you about Chapter 20. Take care and have a great week.